As we begin, will you pray with me? Holy One, on this Pentecost day, gather us up into this place that we might be open to your Spirit dwelling within us and among us. And may we be your people in this moment in time, rejoicing in the gift of life as it unfolds before our very eyes. Amen. First of all, I'd like to begin by thanking the bishop for the kind invitation to share a brief word with you on this Pentecost Sunday, but also having done so in Alaska and in this coming week in Oregon, Idaho, and being honored to be able to be a part of sharing from the pulpit along with Kathleen and with Carlo, who have already spoken. This is a humbling responsibility, and I hope that we all might be open to God's Spirit working among us this morning as we do this, or this afternoon actually, as we do this. And as we gather, I want to begin by saying that the only other time I've been in this space with you was in 2014. When I came here, I realized that I was then on holy ground. And I want to reference that as we begin because when I came to this space, you were remembering here the role in which this space played in the internment of Japanese families. And I remember walking into this space and walking by the luggage and the posters that were a part of that gathering. I think we might be able to show those on screen as well. And so for me, coming here this time reminded me of last time because that was indeed holy ground time for me in this very space. And as you gathered, there was a point in time in which Reverend Derek and Reverend Laura led the communion gathering that was here. And I can remember coming forward, and I think if my memory is correct, I can remember coming and the server who was there serving me was somebody who as a young child had been a part of that experience of being a child in the internment concentration camp process that occurred then. And I want to reference that because I remember receiving communion and having difficulty swallowing the bread. And without the love of God and the Spirit of Christ, I'm not sure that I could have because I felt at that moment I was on a holy ground moment. And so as I enter this space, I feel like we again have that moment before us because I've witnessed you celebrating your rituals, sharing conversation with each other, honoring each other in different ways. And so this has already become holy ground. And now our task as we gather this morning is to be awake and alert enough on Pentecost Sunday so that while we're standing on holy ground, we actually feel the blowing of God's Spirit among us. And so I want to reference the text and have us think a bit about what is occurring in the holy moment that takes place among those who gather in Jerusalem on that occasion long ago. Because as they do, the Spirit of God moves among them in a powerful way, and the experience is transforming even for those who are simply coming and seeing what is taking place in that moment. And we think about that as the birth of the church, and that's why we celebrate it regularly as a part of the cycle of who we are as people who follow Jesus Christ. But what is actually happening in this reading? I mean, beyond being a very difficult passage to read, which was done quite well this morning, what actually takes place is really quite remarkable. First of all, as people are gathered for a ritual event within the Jewish tradition, Pentecost, and people from all over the region have come to Jerusalem to experience something traditional and familiar, suddenly an annual event becomes a spirit-filled moment. You know, that's why I reference what I experienced here in 2014, because I came thinking I was coming to a regular traditional event, your annual conference, and what happened for me was I came to holy ground. And that's what occurred for those who gathered in Jerusalem long ago. We often refer in our tradition to those being kairos moments, where we step out of chronos time and suddenly we're on God's time. And that's what happens for the disciples who gather and for the large crowd who is there. The British researcher Stefan Verdavec calls this a super diversity occasion. It includes people in the text from every nation under heaven. And God's Spirit is so powerfully at work at that moment that people are able to understand each other clearly and recognize the heart of God in their midst. But notice what happens in verse 11. I want to call your attention to it. We don't just have them experience the words of God. It says in the text, we hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. The wonderful works of God. That's what they hear. In other words, the disciples themselves have actually embodied the Spirit of God. They don't just talk about it. Something happens in that moment, much like any holy moment, in which the works of God become visible. So I venture to say that when people experience our words as works of God, love doesn't simply become amor or agape or some other word. It actually is experienced as how we treat each other. Compassion doesn't get translated into Aramaic and Greek and Arabic and any of the other local languages, indigenous languages that were present in Jerusalem gathered that day in the book of Acts. It is actually expressed in how strangers are received at our borders in life and how the poor are viewed in our communities. Justice isn't a word in Tagalog or Russian or French or German or Spanish. It is a way of ordering our lives so that all people are treated with dignity and respect and as God's children. You can see why suddenly everyone present understood what was taking place in their own language. It couldn't be overlooked. It refused to go unnoticed. It was real and alive. It was transforming, not only for the disciples who were gathered, but all who watched what was occurring in their midst. The words of faith became the very embodiment of the works of God. This may be why just 9 chapters later in Acts 11, 25 and 26, we hear these words. Barnabas went to Tarsus in search of Saul, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. They were there a whole year, meeting with the church and teaching large numbers of people. And here is the key line for all of us. It was in Antioch where the disciples were first called Christians, meaning that they were not just people of their words, they were people of their lives and works and actions. And that is what people witnessed, and that is why they were called Christian, followers of Jesus Christ, followers of a way of being people. Friends, this would be like us gathering here today. And rather than being people from Mesopotamia or Medes or Judea or Egypt, instead we represented a different but equally diverse group of people from different traditions and cultures, from Korea and Fiji and Tonga and Mexico, Samoa, Central America, and the Philippines. And maybe it would be like us gathered here today, coming to this event from every culture within the boundaries of the United States, Hispanic and African American, Caucasian and Middle Eastern, Asian and Pacific Islander. And if that weren't enough, it would be as if we gathered in such a way that we represented a variety of gender identities and sexual orientations and differing political and social views and different economic classes. That's what's happening in the book of Acts and among us here, don't you think? Yes. That is what is the super diversity that is present. And somehow God is at work in the midst of it all. In fact, that is God at God's best doing the work of God. Because in these settings we are transformed, and people who are witnessing that transformation themselves are transformed. In the text we learn that when the disciples come together as followers of Jesus and receive the Spirit of God in their lives, not only did everyone witness that reality, but everyone understood that reality. The people suddenly found themselves standing on holy ground, as I did in 2014 here, and as I have done with you this week. Which leads me to a comment about our gathering as a general conference in St. Louis back in February. What grieves me most, among many griefs, is that we gathered then, and in our words, people did not see or experience the works of God's wonders. And so there was a disconnect. And so people walked away hearing our words but not seeing God's wonderful works. Friends, on the other hand, what took place at Pentecost happened for some particular reasons. The Sufi poet Rumi says, as long as there is light in one's heart, you can always find your way home. I'd add, as long as there's light in one's heart, you can always see and discover the works of God at work in the world, and you can always see a path that is marked by Jesus' footsteps. I think there was enough light in people's heart on that Pentecost day for the Spirit to actually come alive, not just for the disciples, but for those who were present and saw what occurred. And no wonder Peter declares, as he quotes the prophet Joel, that prophecy and visions and dreams and wonders come alive when this happens. That's what occurred in Jerusalem. But there can't be room in one's heart to enter in if there's assumptions and judgments, bigotry and closed-mindedness, until those things are removed and actually cast out from our hearts regarding people and life and those around us. There is no room for there to be light. In short, if we can't see Christ in one another, or the Christ in you can't encounter the Christ in me, then there isn't enough room for Pentecost to happen. And this is a huge spiritual challenge that is multifaceted in nature. And it involves how we encounter others and how it is that we tend our own inner spiritual fires. Two of the teachers spiritually for me that have been guides over the years are Mohandas Gandhi and Howard Thurman. And they speak about encounters with each other and how it is that you tend your own inner life. Gandhi puts before us this challenging spiritual reality. He says, if you don't find God in the next person you meet, it is a waste of time to look for God any further. Now that's a spiritual challenge indeed. And Howard Thurman, in a different way, says it this way: don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. No wonder then in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says and sums up all the lines of the law in these words: love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's how you come alive. That's how you see God in every person you meet. It is how our words become the wonderful works of God. So these are not easy things for us to do. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge on Pentecost Sunday to hear these words, because this is how Jesus lived, and he invites us to live that way each day. I think about it in terms of our own Wesleyan tradition. John Wesley talked about practical divinity, and that's what we're speaking about here. When in each encounter we make with the person that's in front of us, we actually can see God's presence there as well. It's as if the Christ in me can encounter the Christ in you. I want to close with a couple stories. Our two really sentences from a single occasion. Back in August, in anticipation of the special session of General Conference, in the Oregon, Idaho Annual Conference, in partnership with the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, we created an event that was held at the Collins Retreat Center. And at that event, we invited people from all over the world, about 50 people, who we felt we wanted to be in conversation with. The event itself was called Listening with Open Hearts, Building Bridges, Deepening Relationships. And in that event, the goal was to create a setting, much like you did with your gathering here, when people gathered around a table, a safe setting where people could be kind and curious toward each other and learn across cultures. And so people were there from Africa and Europe, the Philippines, across the United States. And we tried to create an environment in which those conversations could occur. And after the first day, 2 people stood up in the large group, because I think we'd accomplished that setting that we wanted to do. We're on holy ground. And 2 individuals in their own way and in their own tongue said, why can't we do this at General Conference? Why can we not speak in this way with one another? It's an important question to think about in relationship to the challenge that Gandhi asked and that Thurman spoke about. How is it that we are truly alive to each other so that we can see God in each other? Which led to a very interesting and second comment that was made at different times by the 2 facilitators of that gathering. And they said these words, and I want you to think about them as we think about Pentecost and actually leaving from Pentecost to become Jesus' people in the world. The sentence was this: being here and witnessing this is the church that I would die for. This is the church I would die for. And people said that much like on Pentecost. They did it because they witnessed something profound happening that revealed the works of God in their midst. I would contend that if you are part of an experience that you would die for, that's also an experience that you would live for. So Pentecost is really about that. It is about being with each other so that each of us in our own tongue can experience the wonder of God's works, not only in our words, but also in our lives. And also to come to understand that that is truly something worth living and dying for. May that be so for all of us on this Pentecost day, as we go from this place, as we commission and ordain people in our midst to be servants of Jesus Christ in the world. Amen.